They say love comes when you least expect it. But here at Love and Scars Stories, we've seen it ride in on a snowstorm with a vow no one believed. This is the story of a woman too broken to hope and a man too stubborn to quit, where a desperate deal becomes a love worth waiting for. In the shadow of the Rockies, everything began with 7 words whispered by firelight. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The wind out of Dakota that morning wasn't just cold, it was a warning. It sliced through Ione Fletcher's thin wool shawl like it meant to gut her, dragging with it the scent of snow and the weight of a season that wouldn't spare the weak. At 30, Ione had stopped believing in mercy. She knew how fast love could vanish when winter set its claws in the land. Her fingers, chapped and raw, clenched the axe handle as she swung again. The oak split in two with a sharp crack, shards skittering across the frozen earth. The sound echoed off the sagging boards of what used to be a proud little cabin. It had once held laughter, meals cooked over fire, and arms that wrapped around her at night. But that was before Alden Pike froze stiff on the trail from Eagle Ridge. Rein still in hand, the old mare finding her way home without him. 2 years gone, and she still wore his wedding band on a string tucked beneath her collar. Each swing of the axe made it tap against her chest, a dull, metallic heartbeat of what she'd buried and what still haunted her. Her roof leaked, her walls wept rust. The barn doors sagged off its hinges, and foxes had picked off the last good hens. But every morning, before light touched the fields, Ione rose and fought back the wilderness with calloused hands and pure spite. Sila Quinn and her husband Otis lived 3 miles east with their grown boys. Good folks. They'd offered help more times than Ione could count, but pride sat heavy on her like a snow-soaked quilt. She'd taken 1 basket of preserves last month and carried the shame of it for weeks. Then came the sound. Hoofbeats on hard-packed dirt. She straightened, squinting into the pale sun. A rider approached from the north with a slow, easy gait, like he owned the ground beneath him. And maybe he did. She knew him before he came into focus. Everyone did. Breck Varnell rode a stallion so massive, it looked like a beast from a war tale. And he sat it like the saddle was made for him alone, like the wind moved around him out of respect. Stories clung to that man, like burrs to a trail coat. Folks said he could hoist a steer clean off the ground, had once walked 50 miles through a whiteout to save a dying child. They said horses listened when he spoke, like he whispered in some ancient tongue they remembered. Some whispered he had the blood of giants, passed down from far-off hills. Others swore he had Apache in him, though his hair was golden as a wheat field, and his eyes sharp and cold like frozen rivers. Whatever the truth, Breck Varnell wasn't like other men. He wasn't made for small things. He was a force, a storm that walked on 2 legs. And when he rode up to her fence that morning, Ione Fletcher knew something in her life was about to shift, and shift hard. He'd ridden down from the high country 3 weeks back, taken a room at Lula Dorsey's boarding house, and started poking around town, asking about open land. More than one father gave his daughter a little shove when Breck Varnell came down Main Street, all towering height and quiet power. But he barely glanced their way. The young women fluttered their lashes and laughed behind gloves, but Breck didn't even blink. It didn't take long before folks started whispering maybe he wasn't the marrying sort. Not that the town held it against him. Their curiosity came without judgment. Now he stood here, on her dirt. And Ione Fletcher became suddenly, sharply aware of the faded patches on her dress and the loose strands falling from her bun. She laid the axe down, wiped her cracked hands on her apron, and braced herself. He dismounted with the ease of someone who lived in his own skin, no matter how much of it there was. "Mrs. Fletcher," he greeted, removing his hat. The morning light caught in his hair, bright gold like something the sun itself had woven. His voice carried low and steady, each word measured like he'd waited before letting it go. "Hope I ain't troubling you." She inclined her head, careful to keep that thin space of courtesy between them. "You're welcome on my land, Mr. Varnell, though I can't offer much beyond a nod and a patch of dirt." His gaze flicked to the stack of wood by her boots, then to the axe she'd just set down. "Looks like you're already prepping for the cold." "Out here, it's always prep or perish." She followed his eyes to the sagging homestead behind her. Paint peeling, windows cracked, weeds creeping where vegetables used to grow. "You do what you have to." He gave a slow nod. That's the truth. When he stepped forward, she had to lift her chin just to hold his eyes. There was something in them. Stillness, maybe, or certainty. Whatever it was, it made her breath snag. "I've been watching you, Mrs. Fletcher." Her cheeks flushed hot. "Sir, Not like that." He cut in quickly, nervous hands working the brim of his hat. The gesture clashed with his bulk, made him human, not myth. Not like a man watches a woman he means to take advantage of. He looked her square, like a man watches someone he respects. "You've held this land alone for 2 winters. Most men would have quit." She blinked hard, whether from exhaustion or something softer she couldn't tell. Respect don't patch a roof or fill a root cellar. "No," he agreed, "but it's where all the rest has to start." He fell silent, gaze heavy with thought. Then, "I came to make you an offer." That made her arms fold tight across her chest. The breeze had a bite, but that wasn't why she suddenly felt cold. "What kind of offer?" "The kind that keeps us both from facing another winter alone." He stepped back, giving her space to breathe. "I'm 34, he said plainly. "I own land up near Timber Creek. Solid grazing, good water, plenty of trees. Got coin in the bank. I know how to hunt, how to build, and how to keep a fire lit even in the worst of storms." He paused. "What I don't have is a wife, and what you don't have is safety. This isn't courtship, Mrs. Fletcher. This is survival." The honesty of it hit her like sleet. Unexpected, cold, real. She hadn't prepared herself for this. She'd imagined 100 reasons for his visit, none of them this. "Mr. Varnell." "I know," he said. Quiet but firm. "It sounds crazy. Maybe it is. A man shows up talking marriage when we barely know each other's names." She said slowly, her voice flat. "But I've lived long enough to know. Sometimes the heart sees what the head's too cautious to admit." "The heart?" She let out a brittle laugh. "Mine's buried out back by the chapel, Mr. Varnell. What's left of me is just hanging on till spring." "Maybe that's all we need to start," he said, easing his hat back on, angled just so, a stance she'd come to know as his way of thinking something through. "I'm not asking for your love, Mrs. Fletcher. I'm asking to care for you, and in return, maybe you'd give me the one thing a man can't buy." She looked at him, wary. "And what's that?" "A family." The word landed between them, heavy as a snowfall. She didn't move. "I want children, Ione," he said, using her name for the first time. "I want something to leave behind besides tall tales about the mountain man who never came down." You're still young enough, strong. He met her eyes. You could give me sons. The ground beneath her seemed to shift, like a wagon wheel catching in soft earth. That hard, survival-driven part of her, honed by 2 years of loneliness and loss, started tallying the cold facts. Security, protection, warmth. A man strong enough to shoulder half the weight. But another part, quieter and still raw, recoiled. The part that wore Alden's wedding ring on a string beneath her clothes. The part that remembered. I need time, she whispered. Of course. He nodded, touching the brim of his hat again with reverence. Winter's comin', no matter who's ready. I'll be in town till week's end, lodgin' at Lula Dorsey's place. You've got your answer, you know where to bring it. He turned, mounted his horse with the same smooth motion she'd seen before. But just as he began to pull away, her voice caught the wind. Mr. Varnell. He reined in and looked back, brows lifted. Why me? She asked, barely loud enough for the breeze to carry it. There's prettier women in town. Younger ones, with kin and dowries. A faint, genuine smile curved his mouth for the first time. Because when I saw you swinging that axe, he said, I saw a woman who don't quit. And that's worth more than any dowry in the territory. Then he rode off, dust rising in his wake. And Ione Fletcher stood alone again, axe in hand, the yard stretching quiet before her. But the air felt different somehow. She bent to split another log, but her hands trembled too much to steady the swing. Instead, she lowered herself to the porch steps and pulled Alden's ring from beneath her dress, holding it up to the pale autumn sun. What do I do, Alden? She whispered. What do I do? The wind stirred leaves across the yard, sharp with the promise of early snow. But for the first time in 2 years, winter didn't feel quite so cruel. Somewhere out there, a giant of a man waited on her answer. And for the first time since her world had broken, Ione Fletcher felt the flicker of something she'd thought long gone. Hope. 3 days passed before she saw Breck Varnell again. 3 days of his words haunting every corner of the house, echoing through chores and quiet moments alike. More than once, she caught herself pausing at the cracked mirror above the wash basin, studying the woman staring back. What had he seen in her? This tired figure carved thin by grief and work, that made him believe she could be a mother again. On the 4th morning, she rose with the dawn and stepped onto her porch, and there he was, sitting right on her steps like he'd never left. The golden shell of his grandfather's pocket watch lay open in his palm, catching the blush of morning light. From where she stood, Ione couldn't make out the fine markings carved into it. But she knew they mattered. His eyes lifted as she opened the door. Calm, steady, with a quiet resolve etched across his face. Mrs. Fletcher. He rose, clicked the watch shut with a soft snap, and slid it back into his vest. Apologies for the hour. You been waiting long? She asked, pulling her shawl tighter against the chill. Bare feet rooted to the cold boards, hair loose and unruly from sleep. Long enough to catch the sunrise. He nodded east, where streaks of pink and gold bled across the wide sky. It's brutal country, he said, but beautiful in its own way. Good land for raising a family. His words hit like a hammer, straight back to the matter at hand. Ione's breath caught. Mr. Varnell, I know you haven't made your choice. He stepped closer, and the warm scent of leather and pine reached her like a memory. But there's something I need you to hear. might help you decide." She didn't speak, but her heart picked up its rhythm. "This belonged to my grandfather," he said, drawing the watch back out, fingers tracing its delicate engravings. He brought it with him from Norway when he was barely 18. Carried it through 4 decades of hard farming in Minnesota. Through drought, blizzards, the deaths of 2 wives, and the raising of 6 children. Ione leaned forward slightly, caught by the detail in the goldwork. When he passed it to my father, he told him it wasn't just for telling time, it was for remembering, that every moment counts, especially the ones that shape what's coming. She took a step closer, pulled by the history wrapped in brass and years. "My father carried it for 30 years, right up to the day a log crushed him in a work accident. I was 22. Breck's voice had dropped low now, raw and unguarded. "Right before he passed, he gave it to me, said not to hand it over till I was ready to give my name to a woman, and my life to building something that'd outlast us both." Those words drifted between them like frost settling quiet across a roof. "And you think I'm that woman?" "I think you understand something most folks don't," he said. "That time's precious, that you don't waste it." He held her gaze, steady and unflinching. "I'm 34, Mrs. Fletcher. Most men my age have wives, kids, deep roots holding them through storms. I waited too long, waiting for perfect. But watching you these past weeks, watching you fight tooth and nail to keep what little's yours, that told me everything I needed." Heat bloomed in Ione's face. "You hardly know me. I know you're up before dawn every damn day, milking animals that barely give enough to keep you going. I know you've hammered fence posts and patched roof tiles alone, when that kind of work should take 2. And I know that's the same dress you've worn 3 days straight, 'cause the only other one's more patch than cloth." His voice was soft, no judgment in it. "And I know you loved Alden Pike enough to still wear his ring around your neck." Without thinking, she touched the chain at her collarbone, feeling the familiar weight of the band. "Love doesn't vanish just 'cause someone's gone," she said. "No, it don't," Breck answered. "But life don't wait on grief either." He stepped even closer. "I'm not asking you to forget him or stop carrying his memory. I'm asking to stand beside you, to build something new, something that honors what came before, but dares to hope for more." His words lingered like breath in cold air, half vow, half plea. Ione looked past him for a moment, to the still empty rooms inside her house, to the silence that swallowed every night after chores were done. And for the first time in 2 long years, she let herself imagine what it might feel like, not to be alone anymore. The sun barely crested the horizon when she heard him speak. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Varnell? Marriage? A partnership? Some future where I don't freeze to death just because I ran out of firewood?" He didn't flinch. Instead, he paused, choosing his words like a man loading a bullet he meant to fire straight. "I'm proposing this. By winter, you'll be carrying my child. And come spring, you'll have a family again." The words should have knocked the wind out of her, but instead they kindled something warm and quiet inside her chest. There was no poetry to it, no courtly pretense, just raw truth, laid bare the way only a man who'd faced his own loneliness could offer. "And what if I can't bear children?" she asked, voice low. "What if this body's had enough of bearing and birthing and decides not to give again?" Breck didn't hesitate. "Then we face that together, like married folks do." She stared at him. "That easy for you to say?" He stepped closer, his voice steady. "I've seen the way you tend your land, the way you treat your stock, how you coax life from that stubborn soil. You've got a mother's heart, Ione. And where your heart goes, I believe your body'll follow." Ione turned away, her eyes sweeping across the land she'd nearly broken herself trying to keep. The morning light made no excuses. It showed the cracks in the walls, the thin patches in the roof, the garden she'd fought tooth and nail for. But it also lit the firewood stacked high, the chicken coop patched with her own hands, and the rows of vegetables that kept her belly from going empty. "People'll talk," she said softly. "People always do." His voice was calm. "The only thing that matters is whether you'd rather survive for their sake or live for your own." When she faced him again, the steadiness in his gaze hadn't faltered. "You make it sound simple." "Some things are simple," he said, "even if they ain't easy." Then he took a step back, giving her room like a man who understood when to press and when to wait. "I'm not a romantic, Ione. I won't bring you flowers or read you poems. But I'll be beside you when you work. I'll guard what's yours like it's mine. I'll give you everything I've got. And when you're ready, really ready, I'll love you without holding back." The promise in his voice hit her like a prayer whispered over a grave. When was the last time someone had offered to take care of her? Not pity, not duty, choice. When had someone last looked at her and seen worth? "How long would you want to wait?" she asked, her voice trembling. "For the wedding, I mean." "As long as you need," he said, "but snow's coming. I'd rather have you in my home before the drifts get too high to cross." That practical thought, offered so simply, made her chest ache. "2 weeks," she murmured. "Maybe 3. Then suddenly the words escaped her lips before she could stop them. 1. Breck's brow lifted. 1 week? She nodded. "I'm not certain. Not really. But I am sure that one more winter alone might break me. And what you're offering? It's more than I ever let myself hope for." "And what's that?" "A chance to live, Breck, not just get by." For the first time, something softened in his face, the lines of grit and survival easing just enough to let a flicker of tenderness show through. "Then it's settled," he said, voice low. 1 week from today, if you'll have me." She held out her hand. 1 week? He took it in both of his grip warm and sure. For such a large man, his touch was surprisingly gentle. "But I have conditions," she warned. His eyes narrowed just a bit. "Name 'em." She kept her name, at least until after the wedding. And for now, she kept the house too. "I need to know there's somewhere I can come back to, if it doesn't work between us," she said softly. Breck Varnell gave a quiet nod. "Fair enough. Though I hope you'll find my place more comfortable than this one, especially when winter rolls in." Ione found herself picturing the land he'd spoken of up in the high country. Timber, fresh water, wide meadows. A place meant to shelter a family through long, harsh months. "Where exactly is your property?" "About 20 miles north, in the foothills below Eagle's Pass," he replied. She froze. That was the same range where Alden Pike had died. Good hunting, good grazing, and a spring that runs year-round. "I've been building the house for 3 years now. Always figured one day I'd have someone to share it with." His eyes locked on hers. "And now I will." "Now you will," she echoed. He let go of her hand, but didn't step back. His voice grew low, earnest. "Mrs. Fletcher, want you to know, I don't take this lightly. Marriage to me ain't just a business deal. It's sacred. When I give you my name, and you give me yours, it'll be with the aim of keeping it that way. The weight in his words pressed against her chest. I understand, she whispered. Do you? His eyes darkened, voice rougher. Because once we're wed, once you're carrying my child, there won't be no turning back. You'll be mine, and I'll be yours. Through better or worse. She ought to have felt caged by that kind of claim. But instead, a wild, reckless heat bloomed under her skin. When had anyone ever wanted her so wholly? Fought for her like that? I understand, she said again. And this time, it came from somewhere deep inside. He nodded, satisfied. I'll speak to Reverend Ebner this morning. We'll make arrangements. Is there anything you'd want, special for the ceremony? He asked. Something simple, she murmured. Just simple. And I'd like Sila Quinn to stand beside me, if she's willing. Of course. I'll ask Otis to stand with me. Tipping his hat back over his brow, he stepped down from the porch. 1 week, Ione. 1 week and everything changes. She sat on the steps, long after he'd ridden out, fingers curling around an old ring. Alden's. The gold band was smooth now from years of wear, a symbol of simpler times and simpler vows. But maybe it was time for something more. Something that spoke to the woman she'd become. In 1 week, she'd be Mrs. Breck Varnell. And if his prediction proved right, by winter, she'd be carrying his child. That should have scared her. But instead, it filled her with a strange, forgotten feeling. Hope. The next morning, Sila Quinn arrived before the sun had even cleared the trees. 3 miles she'd ridden fast, cheeks flushed pink from cold and curiosity. She tied her horse at the post with practiced hands and marched right up the porch. Ione was sitting there mending a torn petticoat. Sila planted her hands on her hips in a way Ione knew all too well. Well, she huffed, you gonna make me guess? Or are you finally gonna tell me why half the town's buzzing about Breck Varnell showing up twice at your place in less than a week? Ione set her needle aside and met her friend's gaze squarely. He asked me to marry him. Marry him? Sila nearly choked. Ione Fletcher, you've barely spoken 2 words to that man your whole life. We've said plenty these last few days, Ione said calmly. Ione Fletcher rose from her chair, brushing down her skirts with steady hands. I said yes. Sila Quinn's mouth opened, then snapped shut again, stunned like she'd been hit with cold creek water. Finally, she dropped onto the porch step, all her usual fire snuffed out. You've lost your mind. The grief's finally scrambled your thinking. My mind's just fine, thanks. Ione sat again, picking up her sewing like it was any other day. It's everything else that's falling apart. Everything else? Sila looked around the place with new eyes. The drooping roof, the sagging porch rail, the weary look of a home held together by willpower alone. Oh, Ione, how bad's it really gotten? The rawness in her voice cracked something in Ione's chest, tore down just enough of the walls she'd been holding up. Bad enough that I won't make it through another winter on my own. Bad enough that marrying a man I barely know feels like the most sensible choice I've made in 2 years. Sila went quiet, her no-nonsense nature squaring off with the part of her that wanted to shield Ione from everything harsh in the world. Tell me about him. I mean, really tell me. Not what the town gossips whisper over canned peaches. He's direct, straight to the point, honest in a way that's almost painful. Ione said, pausing in her stitching. He wants children, and he believes I can give them to him. She thought of the way Breck Varnell had looked at her. No pity, no sadness, just belief. Maybe even something close to respect. He's offering me a future, Sila, a real home, not just a shelter until the next storm hits. And what are you offering him? The question hung in the air like breath on a frosty morning. What did she have to give? A widow with calloused hands and a heart full of someone else, she said quietly. Then lifted her chin. But I'll give him whatever he needs. A wife, a mother to his children, someone to hold the line with him when life turns mean. Sila reached over, resting a hand over Ione's restless fingers. And what about love? What about it? The edge in her voice surprised even her. Love didn't keep Alden warm when that blizzard swallowed him in the pass. Love didn't patch this roof or pay the store tab once he was gone. Her voice wavered, but she didn't look away. Maybe it's time I stopped chasing ghosts and chose something real. You loved Alden. I still do. Ione pulled her hands free and touched the chain at her neck. I'll always love Alden. But he's gone. And Breck Varnell's offering me a reason to keep breathing. Sila didn't speak for a while, just looked out at the brittle grass, the wind-tired fence lines, the old pine with a broken limb that still hadn't fallen. When? 1 week. We'll marry at the church. Keep it plain. 1 week? Sila's eyebrows shot up. Ione, that's hardly enough time to... To what? Ione cut in, voice taut. Plan a feast we can't afford? Order a dress I'll wear once and store in mothballs? Invite kin who'd never make it in time anyway? She laid her sewing aside and stood, the movement sharp, like she had to pace off her own nerves. What's the point of waiting, Sila? So I can talk myself out of it? Let doubt gnaw through me till I run back to being cold and alone. Are you making a mistake? It was the same question that had haunted Ione in the dark last night. Staring at the cracked ceiling and listening to wind slip through the walls. Was she trading one uncertainty for another? Was it fair to Breck to herself? I don't know, she admitted. But I know what it looks like if I don't try. I know what winter alone feels like. And I can't go through that again. Sila nodded slowly, the light shifting in her eyes. She understood now. Really understood. What do you need me to do? The simplicity of Sila's question, no judgment, no hesitation, brought a tight sting behind Ione Fletcher's eyes. Stand with me, she whispered. Be there when I say yes to this. Sila reached over, clasping her hand tight. Of course. Then, after a beat, and afterward, when you're Mrs. Breck Varnell and living up in those mountains 20 miles from here? Ione exhaled. I don't know. I guess I'll have to learn how to be someone else. The rest of the morning was spent sorting through Ione's life, deciding what to take, what to leave, what couldn't be carried into the next chapter. It was sobering work. Watching 6 years of marriage be reduced to a few boxes and bundles. In the back room, Sila uncovered the unfinished rocking chair Alden Pike had been building. The wood was worn smooth from long hours of sanding, but still lacked the finish, the polish, the heart of what he'd meant to make. They both froze. He was making it for the children we never had, Ione murmured, brushing her hand along the curved armrest. He used to say he'd finish it once we had something to celebrate. What will you do with it? Ione stared at the chair, remembering the hope carved into every joint, every line. I'll take it with me, she said softly. Maybe Breck can finish what Alden started. The meaning in that hung thick between them. Scylla wrapped the chair in an old quilt, treating it like a sacred relic of a dream that hadn't died, only waited. As they packed, Scylla updated her on town gossip. Who was courting who? Which families planned to head east before the snow came? And the latest fire and brimstone sermons from Reverend Ebner. It was the kind of idle talk that once stitched together Ione's days like patchwork. You know, folks'll talk, Scylla said, as they folded Ione's Sunday dress into a worn trunk. People always talk. Breck said the same. And that doesn't bother you? Once, the opinion of her neighbors had held weight. Real, paralyzing weight. Now, when the choice was between their approval and staying alive through another bitter season. I care more about surviving winter than I do about what Lula Dorsey thinks of my decisions. Scylla chuckled. Lula's been trying to pawn one of her daughters off on Breck Varnell since the day he rode into town. She's gonna blow her top when she hears he picked you. I didn't trap him, Ione replied, her tone firm. He chose me. It mattered, that difference. More than she could explain. He could have had any woman from here to the next 3 counties. But he came to me. Why do you think that is? It was the question Ione had turned over in her mind for nights now. The way Breck spoke of strength, of recognizing grit in her that others had missed. He said he was looking for someone who doesn't quit. Someone who fights for what matters, even when the odds are stacked high. And that's you? Ione glanced around the room she'd shared with Alden. The peeling wallpaper, the cracked window frame that never quite sealed right. She'd poured herself into this place, fought for it, clung to it, survived because of it. Maybe it was. She closed the trunk lid slowly. Maybe now it's time to fight for something more than just staying alive. They finished in a quiet rhythm, each lost in her own thoughts. As Scylla reached the doorway, she paused, her face tightening with the weight of a question she didn't want to ask. I've got to say this, Ione, as your friend. Ione turned, meeting her gaze. Are you attracted to him? To Breck? Color rushed into Ione's face. Scylla, it's a fair question, Scylla said gently. You're about to share a bed with this man. Maybe raise his children. Physical compatibility matters, Scylla had said bluntly, especially in a marriage that's beginning without love. The question forced Ione Fletcher to face what she'd been skirting around. When Breck Varnell stood near her, when his broad hands covered hers, when his voice dropped low and serious, talking about children and futures, had she felt anything more than obligation? More than the comfort of having a roof and a plan? He's imposing, she admitted slowly, but not in a way that scares me. When he looks at me, I feel seen, like I'm worth protecting. That's not what I asked. Ione met her friend's eyes squarely. Yes, she confessed. I'm attracted to him. Lord help me. I want the man who's replacing my dead husband. Alden isn't being replaced, Scylla said gently. You're honoring him by choosing to keep living. It was exactly the kind of truth Ione hadn't known she needed. And though she couldn't quite wrap her heart around it yet, it eased something tight inside her. After Scylla left, Ione sat alone in her nearly bare home and tried to picture her future. Just 8 days away, she'd be Mrs. Breck Varnell, living in a house she'd never seen, lying beside a man she barely knew, bound to bear his children not for love, but because he'd chosen her for her fire, not her face. It should have made her anxious. But for the first time in years, she found herself hoping for the morning. 2 days later, Ione woke to the sharp crack of a hammer striking wood. She slipped on her boots and stepped outside, blinking against the sun, and spotted Breck balanced atop the steep pitch of her roof, replacing the rotted shingles that had been leaking for months. His shirt clung to his back, already damp with sweat despite the morning chill. He worked with the quiet ease of a man used to hard labor. "Mr. Varnell," she called up, shielding her eyes. "What are you doing?" He paused, looked down with that steady, unreadable gaze. "Fixing your roof." He tapped another nail in place. "Can't have my future wife sleeping under a drip." Something in the way he said "my" made a strange warmth settle in her chest. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." He didn't look down again, just kept hammering, clean and measured. "Besides," he added, "gives me something to do with my hands while I wait on Sunday." She stood watching him a moment longer, noting the care with which he lined up each shingle. He didn't rush. He didn't cut corners. He handled even a roof like it mattered. "There's coffee if you want some," she called. "In a bit. Want to beat the heat on this patch." Inside, she made breakfast, but her eyes kept drifting to the window. Something about his rhythm, his steadiness, made her breath catch. It had been a long, long time since anyone had tended to her needs without her having to ask. An hour passed before he climbed down, and she met him on the porch with a plate of eggs and a steaming cup. He thanked her simply and ate like a man who saw food as fuel, not pleasure. But he still complimented her cooking with quiet sincerity. "That roof will hold till spring now," he said, wiping his mouth with the napkin she'd tucked into the plate. "Though you won't be here to worry about it." "About that," Ione set her cup down, nerves tightening her spine. "I've been thinking about after the wedding." His eyes narrowed slightly, all focused now. "You having second thoughts?" "No, just questions. About what kind of wife you expect me to be." Breck leaned back in his chair, arms folding slowly across his chest. His eyes searched hers with that same intensity she'd come to expect. Unflinching, honest. "What kind of wife do you want to be?" The question hit Ione Fletcher like a gust of wind through a canyon. Sudden, disarming. Alden had never asked anything like that. He'd simply assumed she'd take to marriage like a saddle to a horse, there to serve, to help, and eventually to bear his children. But Breck Varnell was different. He wasn't handing her a role, he was handing her a choice. "I want to be useful," she said at last, voice firm. "More than just a vessel for children. I can handle farm work, manage a household, tend animals if it comes to it. I don't want to just sit pretty on a porch swing." "Good," he said, draining the last of his coffee. "I wasn't looking for pretty." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch, worn smooth from years of use. "Brought you something." Curious, Ione took it, running her fingers along the soft seams. Inside were tiny cloth packets, each neatly labeled in tidy script. "That one's feverfew, for headaches," Breck said, pointing them out. "Willow bark for pain, echinacea to keep sickness off you. Chamomile if sleep gives you trouble. Ginger root. Well, that's for when the morning sickness starts, if it comes to that." The care in his voice cracked something in her. Her throat tightened. "You made this?" "Learned it from my grandmother. She was part Ojibwe, part Norwegian, knew more about healing than half the doctors in this territory. He watched her as she gently picked up each packet. Figured a woman out here, living on her own, ought to know how to care for herself, especially if there's a baby involved. That word, pregnancy, fluttered through her like a startled bird. You seem real sure that'll happen fast. Breck tilted his head. Aren't you? There was no pressure in his tone, just honest curiosity. I don't know, Ione admitted. Alden and we tried for years. Nothing ever came of it. Could be, he said calmly. You just needed the right man to plant the seed. She flushed at the bluntness, but his matter-of-fact tone made the intimacy feel less daunting. There was no shame in it, just truth. Well, he added, we won't know till we try. Heat crept up her neck. In 4 days, she'd be lying beside this man, learning his body, giving him hers. The thought should have scared her, but instead, it stirred something deeper. Anticipation. A wild, unfamiliar kind. I should tell you, she said quietly. I don't have much experience. His brows lifted slightly. How little we talking? Alden was gentle, she explained. Always mindful of my comfort. Our time together was brief, rare even. Mostly when he thought we might conceive. Breck was silent for a long stretch. When he finally spoke, his voice had softened. Ione, I need you to understand something. When you become my wife, when you share my bed, it won't just be for making babies. He leaned in just a touch, his gaze steady as stone. A man and his wife should take pleasure in each other. Should come together because they want to, not just because they're trying to make a child. That connection, it matters. I'm not sure I even know how to respond that way, Ione Fletcher confessed, shame creeping into her voice. You won't know, Breck Varnell said softly, until someone's patient enough to show you. He reached across the table, his large, weather-worn hand resting over hers. The warmth in that simple touch melted something frozen inside her. I'm not Alden Pike, Ione. I'm not going to treat you like some fragile thing that'll break if I breathe too hard. And I sure as hell won't be sorry for wanting you like a man should want his wife. But I'll wait. I'll wait until you're truly ready. Those words made her chest tighten. No one had ever asked what she wanted. Not like this. With Alden, it was all duty, timed and calculated, chasing conception like a chore. But Breck, he was talking about partnership, about desire, about pleasure shared. How patient, she asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. As long as you need, he replied, voice low and even. Days? Weeks? Months, if that's what it takes. He ran his thumb across her knuckles, each stroke tender as spring rain. Though I hope it won't be so long. I hope you'll come to want me like I already want you. His words hovered in the quiet between them, like a bridge she hadn't yet dared cross. Breck wasn't looking for a helper or a womb to carry his legacy. He wanted her, as a woman. That kind of yearning. It shook her. I should get back to work, she murmured, though she made no move to draw her hand away. In a minute, he said gently. He turned her palm over, studying the roughened skin, the small calluses earned from labor. These'll soften once you stop driving yourself to the bone every day. I like 'em just fine, she said, her chin tilting a little. They prove I can stand on my own. He smiled. Now they'll prove someone else means to stand beside you. Lifting her hand, He pressed a kiss to the center of her palm. The heat of it rippled through her like wildfire. 4 more days, Ione. Just 4. And you'll never have to carry anything alone again. After he rode off toward town, Ione sat still on the porch, Breck's medicine pouch cradled in her lap. He could have picked someone younger, softer, more practiced in the ways of running a home. But he hadn't. He'd chosen her, with her rough hands, her bruised heart, and her doubts about whether she could ever give him what he longed for most. She opened the pouch once more, breathing in the sharp, earthy mix. Feverfew, willow bark, ginger root. He'd thought ahead to her comfort through pregnancy. He believed, without question, that there would be a child. And for the first time since agreeing to this union, she let herself see it, the weight of a baby in her arms. Laughter echoing through the house Breck had built with his own hands. The stunned joy on his face when she'd whisper that his seed had taken root. It hit her like lightning, sharp and bright. Maybe Scylla Quinn had been right. Maybe this wasn't about replacing Alden. Maybe it was about honoring him. By choosing to keep living, to keep reaching, to let hope in again. 4 days. That's all that stood between her and a new name, a new life. Mrs. Breck Varnell. And the ashes she'd built her survival from? They were about to give way to something wild, something unknown, something alive. She pressed her face into her hands, breathing in the scent of herbs, of care. And for the first time in 2 long years, Ione Fletcher let herself believe in the possibility of joy. The morning of the wedding broke crisp and clear, with a hard sky that glinted like glass, one that promised snow before nightfall. Ione stirred before dawn in the guest room at Scylla's place, where she'd slept to uphold the old tradition of not laying eyes on her groom on the day of the vows. Frost veiled the window, and her breath fogged the air. She pulled the quilt tighter, heart galloping inside her chest like a Mustang sensing change on the wind. In just a few hours, Ione Fletcher would become the wife of a man she'd known for exactly 1 week. Scylla Quinn swept into the room like a storm on a mission, balancing a tray heavy with breakfast and determination. "Eat," she ordered, setting the tray down beside the bed. "You're going to need your strength today." Ione managed a few spoonfuls of porridge, but her nerves had turned her stomach into a tight knot. She gave up on food and turned instead to the quiet ritual of getting ready for what was bound to be the most important day of her life. Her wedding dress was simple, her best blue wool, pressed smooth and clean. At the collar, white lace that once belonged to her mother added a touch of grace. Scylla had insisted she borrow a pair of pearl earrings, saying it was good luck to wear something borrowed. In her reticule, tucked safely inside, was Alden Pike's old ring, no longer hanging around her neck, but not quite ready to be put away for good either. "You look beautiful," Scylla said softly after pinning her hair into a careful chignon, stepping back to admire her work. Different somehow, more hopeful. "I feel different," Ione admitted. Studying her reflection, there was color in her cheeks, light in her eyes she hadn't seen in years. "Scared half to death," she added, "but different." By the time they arrived at the church, a surprising crowd had already gathered despite the early hour and the modest nature of the ceremony. Word had traveled, as it always did in towns like this, and half the county had shown up to witness the unlikely match between the giant cowboy and the widow who'd caught his eye. Breck Varnell stood at the front beside Otis Quinn, both men stuffed into stiff Sunday suits, looking more like caged bulls than groomsmen. But the second Ione appeared at the end of the aisle, leaning on Sila's arm, Breck's expression shifted. His eyes lit up like sunrise breaking over the plains. "You're beautiful," he murmured when she reached his side. The words for her ears only. "You clean up all right yourself," she replied, her eyes flicking over the dark suit that made his shoulders look even broader, his pale eyes sharper than ever. Reverend Ebner began the service with familiar words. Marriage is a sacred bond, a union blessed by God for comfort and companionship. But Ione couldn't focus on the sermon. All she could feel was the steady warmth of Breck's presence beside her. The rhythm of his breath, the strength in the hand that found hers as they stood together before God and neighbors. "Do you, Breck Varnell, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" "I do," Breck said, his voice strong and steady as an oath carved in stone. "And do you, Ione Fletcher, take this man?" She looked up into his face, saw the hope, the patience, the quiet promise, and felt her heart twist with emotion. "I do." The ring he slid onto her finger wasn't gold, like Alden's had been. It was silver, with fine, hand-carved engravings that shimmered in the morning light, filtering through the church windows. He'd made it. Of course he had. Like everything else he'd given her, it came from his hands, his effort, his heart. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Dakota," Reverend Ebner declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Breck's big hands came up to frame her face, gentle as snowfall. His thumbs brushed her cheeks as he leaned in. The kiss was tender, reverent, a vow whispered through skin instead of words. It wasn't a claiming. It wasn't hunger. It was warmth, shelter, a spark that curled inside her like fire catching kindling. And in that one quiet moment, Ione Fletcher finally understood what Sila had meant when she spoke of belonging in someone's arms. When their lips finally parted, Ione Fletcher met Breck Varnell's eyes, full of quiet heat and that deep-banked fire that made her stomach twist. Whatever came of their union, one thing was certain. This man wouldn't lack passion. The church erupted in applause. For the next hour, Ione stood beside Breck, receiving congratulations from neighbors she'd known for years. But now, they looked at her differently. She was no longer the pitied widow scraping by. She was Mrs. Breck Varnell, wife to one of the most respected men across 3 counties. Sila Quinn had arranged a modest gathering in the church hall. Coffee brewed strong, cake served in paper napkins, and the air full of easy chatter, the kind that marked the milestones of small-town life. Still, Ione noticed a certain edge in some of the women's glances. Older matrons with tight mouths and sharper eyes watched her and Breck like they were reading a scandal through glass. "They're wondering if you're already expecting," Sila murmured near her ear. "Folk think quick courtships mean quicker consequences." "Let 'em wonder," Ione muttered, her cheeks flushing hot. "Ain't their concern." "No," Sila agreed, "but it'll become their concern if you start showing before winter turns." The words dropped like a stone in her belly. Tonight, she would lie beside Breck for the first time. Tonight, the promise he made, that she'd be carrying his child before winter snow, might start becoming real. Anticipation tangled with nerves in her chest. She watched him move through the room, towering, quiet, and composed. Yet every man paused to ask his opinion, and every woman found some excuse to drift his way with cake and compliments. But his gaze kept finding her, again and again, across the crowd, past conversations. He made her feel claimed, even in silence. And when he looked at her like that, it was easy to forget their marriage hadn't started from love, but from need. As sunset spilled amber light through the church windows, Breck approached her with their coats in hand. "Time to go home, Mrs. Varnell." The name jolted something in her, a soft thrill. She looked up at him and said quietly, "I reckon I am." The wagon ride north led them over rougher land, into hills and rocky paths. Her belongings rattled behind them, tied down tight. His massive stallion trotted beside a gentler mare, the team steady even as the road grew treacherous. "Tell me about the house," she said, breaking the peaceful quiet, not just to fill the silence, but because she truly wanted to know what kind of life he'd built. "It's solid," he replied, his hand steady on the reins. "Built with good timber. Stone foundation. 3 bedrooms, a wide kitchen, a sitting room. Nothing fancy, just meant to last." 3 bedrooms? "One for us," he said without hesitation. "One for guests, and one for children, when they come." His voice didn't falter, like their future was already mapped in his mind. Her breath caught. "I've been working on a cradle," he added. "Just rough carpentry right now, but it'll be ready when it's needed." The image hit her hard. Breck Varnell, alone by lamplight, carving something with those big hands. Not for himself, but for a child not even born yet. Who had ever prepared so quietly, so faithfully for her? As the trail climbed higher, the land turned wild. Rocky ridges, tall pines whispering of cold winds and harsh winters. But it was breathtaking too, and she understood why Breck had carved his life into this place. He hadn't just built a house, he'd built a future. And now, somehow, it included her. This was no land for the faint-hearted. Out here, the wind carried silence and grit, and only those who craved solitude and could shape a life from hardship dared settle this deep into the hills. "There," Breck Varnell said, pointing through the thinning trees. Smoke curled skyward from a chimney, half hidden in the pines. "Home." Ione Fletcher's breath caught. The house was far more than she'd imagined. Bigger, warmer, built from golden-hued logs. It had a wide, wraparound porch that seemed to invite you to sit a while and watch the world turn. The flower boxes, though dried and brittle from the season's end, still bore traces of care. The garden, despite the cold creeping in, had clearly been tended with steady hands. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "You sound surprised." "I guess I am." Her lips curved, a little self-conscious. "I was expecting something rougher, a trapper's cabin maybe." Breck jumped down first, then turned to help her from the wagon. His hands were firm, warm on her waist. "Told you I'd been working on it 3 years," he said simply. "Built it for the woman I hoped would walk through the front door one day. I wanted her to feel it was hers the moment she stepped inside." And just like that, her heart did something strange. Inside, the home wrapped around her like a well-made coat. A stone hearth dominated the main room, the mantel carved with care. Every piece of furniture bore Breck's hand, rough-hewn but thoughtful, solid and true. The place was spotless, but there was a loneliness to it too, like it had been waiting. "I'll show you the rest," he said, lifting her trunk and carrying it down the hallway. Their room faced east. Sunlight promised in the mornings. The bed, massive, hand-built, built for a man of Breck's size, stood centered under thick quilts of green and deep blue. Ione stared at it. Her throat dried. Her fingers itched with nerves. "I'll give you some time to settle in," Breck murmured, setting her trunk gently at the foot of the bed. "There's hot water on the stove if you want to wash up. I'll be in the kitchen when you're ready." When he was gone, she stood alone. The walls were warm, the windows clean. She unpacked in silence. Dresses hung neatly in the tall wardrobe. Her brush, her mirror, placed on the table by the window with shaking hands. And there, nestled in tissue at the bottom of her trunk, she found the wooden spoon, the one Breck had carved for her during their brief courtship. She hadn't thought about it in days. Holding it now beneath the lamplight, she saw it for what it was. A plain thing, useful. But the way the wood had been sanded, smoothed to satin, and how along the handle he'd carved tiny wild roses, almost hidden. It spoke louder than any vow. This was Breck's way. Not flowers, not poems, but hours spent shaping something real, something meant to last. He had thought of her hands, of their meals, of quiet mornings and long winters. That spoon told her more than his voice ever had. She was still turning it in her fingers when a gentle knock came. "Ione?" His voice was soft. "Supper's ready if you're hungry." "Coming," she called, placing the spoon on the table where she could see it every day. In the kitchen, the light was golden and low. The meal simple: venison stew, warm bread, and a jar of wild berry preserves. They ate mostly in silence, the kind thick with expectation. Every clink of spoon to bowl sounded louder than it should have. Then, finally, Breck set his cup down and looked at her. "You nervous?" he asked, quiet but steady. "Yes," Ione Fletcher said at last, "but not in the way I thought I would be." Breck Varnell leaned back in his chair, eyes steady. What kind of nervous then? She searched for the right words, so much tangled up inside her. "I'm scared I won't be what you hoped for, that I won't know how to be the kind of wife you need." His brow furrowed, not from anger, but thought. "And what kind of wife do you think that is?" "I don't know. Someone softer, maybe. Someone who wants you with fire in her blood, not out of duty." He didn't speak right away. When he finally did, his voice was low, anchored in truth. "Ione, I didn't marry you hoping you'd be someone else. I married you because of who you already are. A woman strong enough to carry pain most folks wouldn't survive. A woman honest enough to say what she's afraid of, and brave enough to face it anyway. You trusted a stranger with your future. That takes a kind of strength most men can't even name." She stared down at her hands. "And if I can't? If I never feel that spark," she whispered. "If I can't learn to want you like a wife should want her husband." He stood then, slow and certain, walked around the table, and knelt beside her. His eyes met hers level. "Then we'll build something different," he said. "Respect, companionship, partnership." His hand reached up, gentle fingers brushing her cheek. "Not every marriage burns hot, but the best ones, they last because they're built on trust and real kindness. Is that enough for you?" "It's a start," he said softly. "But I've got a feeling you might surprise yourself. Given time." The way he looked at her made something shift inside. And for the first time since she'd boarded that train, Ione Fletcher began to believe that maybe, just maybe, this marriage wasn't the end of her story, but the beginning of something real. That first night passed with surprising tenderness. Breck kept his word, slow, patient, respectful, and yet, when he claimed her, it wasn't with dominance, but with care. When Ione woke tangled in his arms, cheek pressed to his chest, the world felt different. It wasn't the act itself that had changed her, but the way he'd shown her she was worth touching gently. The days that followed took on a rhythm. Breck rose before the sun. He tended to cattle in the high meadows and rounded up his horses before the frost turned hard. Meanwhile, Ione shaped the inside of the house into something warmer, something shared. To his surprise, and perhaps her own, she took to it quickly. Her touch softened the rooms, gave life to corners that had sat cold for years. He noticed, especially the food. One morning, he broke open a warm loaf and closed his eyes as he inhaled the scent. "Where'd you learn to make bread like this?" "My mother," she said. "She used to say a woman who couldn't feed her family wasn't much of a woman at all." She poured him coffee, noticing how the china cup all but disappeared in his hands. She believed food was one of the purest ways to show love. "She was right," Breck murmured. "She died when I was 17, right before I married Alden Pike." Her voice softened. "Sometimes I wonder what she'd think of all this. Me, marrying a stranger, starting over at 30. Breck spread butter across the warm bread slowly, thinking. "I think she'd be proud," he said, "that you chose life, even after everything tried to break you. That takes grit." The words landed like a warm fire on a cold night. Alden had never said anything like that. Breck thought before he spoke. He listened. He didn't say much, but when he did, it mattered. After breakfast, Breck stepped outside to tend his chores, and Ione wandered deeper into her new home. No longer a visitor, no longer afraid. Beyond the main house, Breck Varnell's land stretched into purposeful order. His big red barn housing horses, a smaller shed full of tools and grain sacks, and a weathered smokehouse clinging to the last scent of venison from late summer hunts. Every structure stood sharp and sound, tended with the kind of precision you'd expect from a man who never did anything halfway. But it was inside the house, in the back room meant for children who hadn't yet come, that Ione Fletcher stumbled across something she never dreamed she'd see again. Buried deep in a cedar trunk, tucked under quilts and winter clothes, lay her mother's old Bible, the same worn leather cover, the same faded spine. Her heart nearly stopped. She'd thought it lost forever, sold alongside everything else after Alden Pike left her drowning in debt. Finding it now, under this roof, felt like a sign from heaven that maybe, just maybe, this marriage had grace behind it. When Breck came in for dinner, she was holding it tight to her chest, like a lifeline. "You bought it back," she said, voice raw. "Bought what back?" he asked, hanging his hat on the peg and pausing mid-step when he saw what she held. "Oh, the Bible. How did you even know it was mine?" "Lula Dorsey mentioned you'd sold off some family pieces. I asked around, tracked the man down, and made him an offer he couldn't turn down." He shrugged like it was nothing. A woman ought to have her mother's Bible, especially starting over. Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered. "You can't possibly know what this means." "I think I might." He stepped closer, his voice low and sincere. We all need something to remind us who we were before everything changed. That night, after the supper was cleared and the last dish dried, Ione curled into the rocking chair by the fire. Not Alden's half-finished one still gathering dust in the barn, but a plain, sturdy chair Breck had made with his own hands. She opened the Bible, its pages falling open to the family record. Her father's old handwriting still held strong. Births, deaths, vows spoken and broken. Everything that tied flesh and spirit together over a lifetime. May I? Breck asked, settling into the big chair beside her. She handed him the book. He studied the names etched in faded ink, pausing on the line that marked her marriage to Alden Pike. His finger hovered there, then moved on. There's space for more, he said quietly. I know, she replied. And she understood what he meant. Soon, that next line would carry their names. And Lord willing, the names of the children yet to be born. I've been thinking, Breck said, closing the book gently. If we have a boy, I'd like to name him after my grandfather, Auric. But I want you to choose the middle name, something from your side. And if it's a girl, he chuckled, then that's your call. I wouldn't know where to start with naming daughters. The way he spoke, like it was a certainty, not just a dream, filled Ione with both hope and quiet dread. It had been 3 weeks since they said their vows. 3 weeks of sharing his bed and learning the unspoken language of touch and trust. She drew a breath. Breck, what if it takes time? What if I don't conceive right away? Could be months, maybe longer. He stared into the fire for a long beat, the silence stretching between them like thread in a loom. When he finally spoke, Breck Varnell's voice wasn't cold or dismissive. It carried a steady warmth, quiet but sure. Then it just means we've got more time, he said. Time to learn each other better, to build something solid underneath us. So when the time comes, we'll already be the kind of parents a child deserves. She held her breath, then let the harder question slip into the space between them. And if I never carry a child, if I'm barren? That word, barren, hung in the air like a sentence. It was the fear she hadn't voiced aloud until now, that she'd fail him, that no matter how well she cooked or smiled or worked beside him, she wouldn't be enough, wouldn't give him what he needed most. Breck didn't flinch. Then we find another way, he said simply. There are always children out there needing a home, needing the kind of love we could give. He turned, his gaze locking onto hers. I didn't marry you to fill a cradle, Ione. I married you because I wanted a partner, someone to stand beside me. If children come, I'll be thankful. If they don't, his eyes softened. I'll still be damn lucky to have you. Her throat ached at the gentleness in his voice. You say that now. I'll say it in 5 years, he said firmly. Or 10. If our friends have grandbabies and we're still alone, then we'll just be alone together. And that'll be enough. He reached for her hand, laced his fingers with hers. But I don't think it'll come to that. I've got a feeling about us, about what we're going to build. What kind of feeling? She asked. The kind that says this is only the beginning, that the best parts are still ahead. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. You'll give me children, Ione. Maybe not this month, maybe not this year, but someday. And when you do, they'll be lucky. because their mama will know how to fight for what matters. That night, wrapped in Breck's arms in the bed that no longer felt foreign, Ione let herself imagine what he saw so clearly. A house filled with noise and muddy boots, the scent of stew on the stove, laughter echoing down the hallway, a daughter with her stubborn jaw and firelight eyes, a son with Breck's quiet strength and open heart. "What are you thinking?" he mumbled, half asleep beside her. "About them," she whispered. "What they'll look like, who they'll grow to be." She touched his face, silvered by moonlight. "And how lucky they'll be to have you as their father." He opened one eye. "You didn't think that the first time I knocked on your door?" "No," she admitted. "I expected someone tougher, harsher. Most men my size are used to getting their way without much argument," he said. "But the good things, love, trust, respect, those can't be taken. They have to be earned." "Is that what you're doing?" she asked softly. "Earning mine?" "Every day," he said. No hesitation, no pride, just truth. "Every single day, I try to be the man you trusted when you said yes." 3 weeks into their marriage, and already she could feel her guarded heart slipping, melting in places she thought were sealed tight. Breck didn't burn like Alden Pike had, wild, reckless. But his love was steady, deep, built from care and patience, and the quiet power of someone who meant what he said. Maybe it was better this way. Not wild romance, but something enduring, real. As sleep pulled her under, Ione let herself believe that this beginning, so practical, so planned, might just lead to something extraordinary. Then came the knock. It was a cold, gray November morning, and the first real snow had started to fall over the distant peaks. She was working bread dough when she heard hooves crunching outside, then a sharp, deliberate knock at the front door. Breck Varnell opened the door, and the voice that followed was unmistakable. Ruel Tanners, the banker from town. "Mr. Varnell, Mrs. Varnell." His tone was stiff, the kind of careful politeness a man uses when delivering something nobody wants to hear. Ione Fletcher wiped the flour from her hands, untied her apron, and stepped into the front room. Her eyes landed on the thick manila envelope clutched in Ruel's hands, and on the deep lines carved into his wind-chapped face. She'd known Ruel for 6 years, back when she'd borrowed from his bank so Alden Pike could plant that first hopeful crop. If Ruel had dragged himself up 20 miles of mountain road in the middle of November snow, it couldn't be good. "What kind of matter?" Breck asked, his voice steady, calm in that way she'd come to recognize over their month of marriage, the kind of calm that masked a brewing storm. Ruel slid the documents from the envelope, the dry parchment crackling as he flipped them open. "It's regarding Mrs. Varnell's previous homestead," he said. "There's been a complication with the estate of Alden Pike." Ione's blood ran cold. "A complication?" she repeated. "His debts were cleared. I lost the land, but everything got paid." "That's what we all thought, ma'am," Ruel said, eyes lowered. "But it appears a debt went unrecorded when your husband passed. A promissory note, $800, signed by Mr. Pike. 2 witnesses have confirmed its legitimacy." "800? Her voice cracked. "No. Alden never borrowed that kind of money, without telling me. The note is dated 6 months before his death. It was used to purchase seed and tools for the expansion he'd planned that spring. And just like that, it came rushing back. Alden's bright eyes and wild dreams, his belief that doubling their yield would set them for life. She'd warned him it was too soon. He'd said he had it covered. Who holds the debt? Breck asked, his voice gone taut and cold. A man named Harlan Vex. He runs a private lending business out of Rapid City, serves clients across the territory. Ruel's thumb slid down the documents. Mr. Vex is demanding full repayment. With interest, the total's now just over $1,000. The number hit Ione like a fist. $1,000. Enough to keep a family fed for 2 winters. An impossible sum that might as well have been a mountain. And if it isn't paid? Breck asked. His voice had dropped. Low, even. Dangerously so. Mr. Vex has legal standing to seize assets equal to the debt, Ruel replied. Since Mrs. Varnell, then Mrs. Pike, inherited her husband's liabilities, and now she's remarried, the debt legally transfers to your household. Ione felt the dread coming, but still she asked, What's he claiming? Ruel didn't meet her eyes. Your current homestead, sir. The house, the barn. All structures on this property. He cleared his throat. Mr. Vex's valuation puts it at approximately $1,200, enough to cover the debt and leave a small surplus. The silence that followed felt heavier than snow. The room seemed to spin beneath Ione Fletcher's boots as the weight of it all hit her. Alden Pike's secret debt wasn't just some number. It was a noose tightening around Breck's land, his work, their fragile new beginning. Let me see those papers, Breck Varnell said. Voice steady, every motion of his hand deliberate and sharp as a drawn blade. Ruel Tanners handed them over, and Breck studied the documents like a man trained to spot traps, eyes narrowing with every line he read. Ione watched him closely, saw the faint twitch at the corner of his jaw as he reached the end of the promissory note. This signature here. Breck tapped the bottom line. You're sure it's real? We had it verified by a handwriting expert up in Sioux Falls, Ruel replied. He compared it with Alden's old bank records, said it's a match. Even with his banker's polish, Ruel's tone softened a touch. I'm sorry, Mrs. Varnell. I know this can't be easy. Ione dropped into the nearest chair, her knees giving way like a fence post in mud. 1 month. Just 1 month into a life she'd barely begun to believe in, and Alden's past was already reaching out to burn it down. When does Vex expect payment? Breck asked, his voice low and dry as old timber. Right away, Ruel said. He's ready to move on legal claim if it ain't settled within 10 days. 10 days. Breck set the documents down, his face unreadable. And there's no way around it? He asked. No loophole to challenge the claim? Paperwork looks clean, Ruel said. Both witnesses are still alive and willing to testify. Unless you've got proof of fraud or forgery. The sentence faded unfinished, but the meaning rang clear. Without proof, they'd lose it all, or pay a sum they couldn't hope to gather. When Ruel finally left, promising to delay things as long as he could, Ione and Breck sat in the quiet of the kitchen, the papers lying between them like a curse. I'm sorry, she said, barely above a whisper. Her throat was raw. I had no idea. Alden never told me he borrowed from anyone in Rapid City. I know you didn't, Breck said gently, no trace of blame in his voice. He likely meant to shield you from the risk. But now it's cost us both. She pressed her hands to her face, feeling shame and helplessness settle like a weight on her chest. All I've done is bring trouble to your life. Hey. His voice pulled her back. Ione, look at me. She didn't move. He knelt beside her chair, rough palms closing over hers. Look at me. Finally, she lifted her eyes, braced for disappointment. But what she found there wasn't blame. It was fire. That same stubborn, quiet fire she'd seen in him the day they met. "This house, this land, it's wood and stone," he said firmly. "It matters, sure, but it's not everything. What matters," he continued, "is us, facing this together, not letting Alden's ghosts tear down what we're building." Her voice broke. "But you spent 3 years building all this, preparing for a family. And now, you'll lose it all. Because you chose me." "I chose a partner," he said. "Someone who stands beside me when the trail gets rough. And this," he gave her hands a steady squeeze, "this is just one more climb. We'll figure it out," Breck Varnell said at last. "Figure what out?" Ione asked, her voice edged with disbelief. "We don't have $1,000. We sure don't have 10 days to make it." He didn't reply right away. Just stared out the kitchen window like the wind might carry in an answer. Then, quiet but sure, he said, "We sell the cattle. Every last one." Ione froze. "Your cattle?" Her voice cracked. "Breck, that herd is everything. It's your blood and sweat. You can't give all that up for Alden's debt." "I can," he said, already made up. "And I will." His tone slammed the door on argument. "The herd's worth enough to cover Harlan Vex's claim, might even leave us enough to start again." "Start where?" she whispered. "If we lose this house." "What then?" "Then we build a new one. Might not be as fine, might not sit in a place this pretty, but it'll be ours." He got to his feet, pacing now, hands flexing with that quiet kind of urgency that meant he was already planning. "Land's cheap further west. Places other folks won't touch. We could stake a claim, raise something simple and sturdy." The way he spoke, like all the years he poured into this home were just stepping stones to what mattered more, sent a wave of guilt crashing through her. And maybe something else, too. Something like love. "Why?" she asked, heart in her throat. "Why would you throw all this away, for a marriage barely a month old?" He stopped pacing, turned to her with eyes so full of tenderness she forgot to breathe. "Because when I gave you my vow, I meant it. For better or worse. This," he gestured around them, "this is the worse. And this is where we prove it means something." She blinked back tears. "But your dreams?" "My dreams were always about having a family, building something lasting, with someone I could trust, respect, maybe even love." He came back to her, cupped her hands in his. "Doesn't matter where the house is, doesn't matter how big. What matters is us, facing what's ahead, side by side." That night, as they lay in bed, whispering through the logistics of selling the herd, Ione couldn't stop looking at him. The way the moonlight cut across his features, strong, unwavering. 6 weeks ago, she'd been a widow staring down another cold winter. Now she was a wife whose past threatened to drag down the one man willing to fight for her future. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "Yes, you do," he answered without hesitation. "You deserve someone who doesn't run when things get hard, who doesn't flinch when life gets messy. That's what love is, Ione. That's what marriage means." And as she drifted off, Ione realized something unexpected. Alden Pike's debt might have taken their home, might have wrecked Breck's plans, but it had also uncovered the truth. Their bond had roots deeper than either of them had dared to hope. The next 3 days passed like a dust storm. Fast, gritty, and hard to breathe. Breck worked with the same calm determination he brought to every task. Only now he was dismantling his legacy. Word spread fast. The Varnell herd was up for sale. By the second morning, buyers began rolling in. Ranchers, traders, opportunists. Ione watched them from the kitchen window, watched her husband greet men he'd once called friends. Their faces held sympathy, sure, but also calculation. They smelled blood. Breck didn't blink. He stood tall, took offers that were insultingly low, never once flinching as he let go of animals he'd raised from calves. Everyone knew he had no choice, and he never let it show. Not once. Scylla Quinn showed up on the third day, dust on her boots and news from town riding on her tongue. She walked straight into the bedroom, where Ione Fletcher was carefully folding linens and packing up the very trunks she had brought barely 5 weeks ago. "I heard about the debt," Scylla said, not one for small talk. She sat herself on the edge of the bed, like she belonged there. "Whole town's buzzin'. Folks are saying it's mighty odd this Harlan Vex fella waited till after you remarried to pull this claim out of his hat." Ione froze mid-fold. "Odd how?" she asked, a glimmer of hope catching in her chest. Scylla leaned forward. "Think about it. If Alden owed him money, why didn't he come calling when Alden first died? Why wait 2 whole years till you're tied to a man with land and stock?" The thought hit Ione like cold water. "You think it's a scam?" "I think the timing's real convenient," Scylla said, eyes narrowing. "Otis has been asking around town, seeing if anyone remembers Alden taking out a loan that spring. No one's heard a peep about it. Not a soul in Rapid City recalls a thing. But that handwriting expert says the signature's Alden's." "Signatures can be faked," Ione whispered, "especially if someone had something to copy from." Scylla's voice dropped. "Otis wants to wire the territorial marshal, Marshal Deke Hollow. Get him to look into it before it's too late." Ione wanted to believe it. But her hope was tangled with fear. Even if it's fake, we've only got 7 days till Vex claims everything. Would there be enough time? "I don't know," Scylla said honestly. "But it's worth a shot. Breck's built something real here. You both have. Don't roll over just yet." Before Ione could answer, angry voices rose from the front yard. They rushed to the window just in time to see Breck standing off with a stranger neither of them recognized, tall, pale, and dressed like he'd stepped off a train from Boston. His suit alone looked like it cost more than most folks made in 6 months. "That's gotta be Vex," Scylla murmured. "Come to get a look at the prize before he snatches it." Out in the yard, the tension crackled like lightning. Breck's jaw was tight, his voice low and sharp. The stranger pointed at the barn, then the house, like he already owned it. Breck turned on his heel and stormed toward the front door. "Ione," he called, flinging it open. His face was stone. "Can you step outside, please? Mr. Vex has a few questions about the debt." Harlan Vex was everything Ione had feared, and worse. Mid-40s, soft hands, smug smile. The kind of man who never built anything but thought he owned everything. "Mrs. Varnell?" he said smoothly. "Unfortunate circumstances, I agree. Still, business is business. Your late husband's debt must be settled." "My late husband never mentioned you," Ione said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I handled all our finances. If Alden borrowed a sum like that, I would have known." Vex gave her the kind of smile that made her skin crawl. "Perhaps he kept it from you. Men often shield their wives from matters of business, especially risky ones. There were no secrets between us. "Well," Vex said with exaggerated patience, "the debt exists, witnessed and documented. But I'm not unreasonable. I'm prepared to offer flexible terms. You may remain in the house until spring," Harlan Vex said, voice coated in syrupy concern. "That should give you enough time to make other arrangements. I've no wish to see a decent family turned out into the cold." The kindness in his tone was a lie so thin it made Ione Fletcher's skin prickle. The man was savoring every second of their fear, like a wolf sniffing blood in the snow. "How convenient," Breck Varnell said, tone flat as flint. "Waiting 2 years after Alden's passed, just long enough for his widow to marry a man with land worth taking." Vex's gaze narrowed like a blade. "I don't appreciate your insinuation, Mr. Varnell. I've pursued this debt through all proper legal channels since learning of Mr. Pike's death. These matters take time, especially when the widow relocates and remarries." "Relocates?" Breck scoffed. "My wife lived in the same damn house for 2 years. You could have knocked on the door any day you pleased." Vex's lips curled faintly. "Be that as it may, legal proceedings move at their own pace." He pulled a silver pocket watch from his vest and flipped it open with theatrical flair. "That leaves you 6 days to settle the balance, or vacate the property. I suggest you use your time wisely." When he finally rode off in his polished carriage, the wheels kicking dust along the road, Ione and Breck stood side by side in the yard. The silence between them was thick with dread and the cold taste of betrayal. "He's lying," Ione muttered. "I can feel it in my bones. Something about this whole thing stinks." "I believe you," Breck said, jaw clenched. "But proving it, that's the hard part." He looked down the road, face set like carved granite. "Sila mentioned we ought to contact Marshal Deke Hollow. Otis has been digging around town. No one remembers Alden saying a word about a loan. Not one." "It's worth a try," she said quietly. "I'll head to town tonight," Breck said. "Wire the marshal. Maybe we can get an investigation started, slow things down, buy some time." That evening, while Breck saddled up and rode off beneath the falling dusk, Ione wandered the house alone. The home that had cradled their hopes now felt like a ghost waiting to vanish. She moved room to room, trailing her fingertips along tabletops, doorknobs, lampshades, memorizing the feel of everything she feared losing. In the spare room, her hand fell to something new. Stacked planks of wood, shaped and sanded with care. A cradle, half-built, unfinished, but lovingly crafted. Breck had been working on it in secret, for their child, for a child who, perhaps, would never come. Her breath caught. Tears welled fast and hot. She sank to the floor beside it, cradling one of the smooth rails like it might break her heart. Her body had betrayed them again. Her courses had come that very morning, like clockwork, washing away every last shred of hope he still held on to. An hour later, Breck returned to find her sitting there in the lamplight, tears streaking her cheeks. He dropped to the floor beside her, arms folding gently around her. "This debt ain't your fault," he whispered. "None of this is." She didn't answer right away. Her hand rested on the cradle wood, fingers brushing the grain. "It's not just that," she finally said. "I'm not pregnant, Breck. 6 weeks and still nothing. What if I can't give him the child he longs for?" Ione Fletcher sat with that fear gnawing at her heart. 6 weeks wasn't long, not by any measure. Some women took months, years even, before a child took root. And they still went on to fill cradles and homes with laughter. But what if she wasn't one of them? What if the reason she'd never had children with Alden Pike wasn't bad luck, but biology? What if Breck Varnell's faith in her was misplaced? Scylla Quinn sat beside her, quiet, thoughtful. When she spoke, her voice was calm and steady. Then he'll love you for who you are, not for what you can give him. You think a man like Breck would trade his land, his cattle, his whole damn future just for a promise of babies? She shook her head. That ain't the kind of love you two got. But children, they were part of his vow. Ione whispered. He said, by winter you'll have my son growing inside you. What happens when winter comes and I'm still empty? Then you face that pain together. Silas said gently, squeezing her hand. Same way you're facing this mess with Harlan Vex, side by side. She leaned closer. I've watched the way you two look at each other, Ione. That ain't just about babies. It's about building something that'll last even when the storms come. That night, Breck returned from town, coat dusted with frost and eyes lit with urgency. He brought hope and frustration. Marshal Deke Hollow agreed to open an investigation, he said as they readied for bed. But it'll take weeks. We're on our own till then. He sat beside her, pulling off his boots. I also wired a few banks in Rapid City, asked around about Vex. If he's legit, someone will know. And if he's a fraud, we might just catch him in the lie. Ione nodded, heart aching. And if we run out of time? Then we stick to the plan, he said, voice firm. Sell what we can, pay what we must, and start fresh, together. He reached for her, strong arms drawing her close. Either way, we face it together. Lying in the dark, Ione listened to the rhythm of his breathing, steady and sure. Tomorrow would drag them one day closer to the deadline, one day closer to maybe losing everything, but it would also test what they were truly made of. In 6 days, they'd know if Harlan Vex could steal their land. But tonight, held safe in Breck's arms, Ione dared to believe that some things couldn't be taken by ink or law. Breck, she whispered. Whatever happens, marrying you was the best thing I ever did. His arms tightened around her. Even if it costs me everything? Even then. Because what we're building, it's worth more than all of it. For the first time since Reverend Ebner brought that cursed telegram, Breck's shoulders finally eased. Sleep, Mrs. Varnell. Tomorrow, we fight. The breakthrough came on the 5th day. A rider stormed into the yard, horse lathered and sides heaving. It was Otis Quinn, breathless and red-cheeked from the mountain cold. We got him, he shouted, leaping from the saddle and striding toward the porch where Breck and Ione waited. The man who forged Alden's signature. We found him. Ione felt her knees buckle. Relief slammed through her like sunlight after a storm. Who? She gasped. Otis held up a crumpled telegram. Remember Henry Walsh? Used to clerk at Reverend Ebner's bank till they caught him skimming from accounts? Breck's eyes narrowed. I remember. Well, he's the one. We got proof. He vanished about 6 months back, Otis Quinn said, handing over the telegram with wind-chapped fingers. Marshal Deke Hollow tracked him to Denver. Once they hit him with the threat of federal charges, the man crumbled, confessed everything. Breck Varnell took the paper, his eyes scanning line by line, satisfaction building in his jaw. Walsh admits it all. The forged promissory note, the entire scheme. Harlan Vex approached him last year with a proposition, forge false debt records tied to dead men whose widows had remarried into property. He had access to bank records. Ione Fletcher murmured, stunned. He knew Alden's handwriting well enough to forge it. But what about the witnesses? Her voice barely lifted above a whisper. Reverend Ebner said 2 men could vouch for the note's authenticity. Blackwood's partners, Otis said grimly. Marshall arrested all 3 last night. He held up a second page. Walsh kept ledgers, Ione, names, places, families they targeted. You weren't the first, but thanks to you 2, you'll be the last. Relief swept through Ione so hard her knees buckled. She reached for Breck's hand, needing the steadiness of it just to breathe. The debt's void, Breck said, eyes locked on hers. Wiped clean, Otis confirmed. Vex has no legal claim to this land or anything else. Frankly, he's lucky if he doesn't rot in territorial prison. He folded the telegram like a sacred letter. Marshall's riding out tomorrow. Wants to hear your statement himself. After that, it's officially over. That evening, sitting before the fire that now crackled in a house no longer threatened, Ione found herself swallowed by a tide of emotions. Relief, yes. Gratitude, deeply. But under it all, a hollow kind of ache. We nearly lost it all, she whispered, and I keep thinking about the cradle. Breck glanced over, face unreadable. What cradle? She turned toward him. The one you've been building in the spare room. Thought I wouldn't notice. Color crept up his neck. I was going to surprise you, once we had something to celebrate. His gaze met hers, unguarded. Didn't want to say a word until we were sure that you were carrying. Ione's heart twisted, that gentle hope in his voice. It nearly broke her. How could she tell him that hope was slipping away again? Breck, she started, then faltered. You're not pregnant? He said softly. Not angry, just resigned. Her lips parted. How did you know? I've been watching, hoping, praying for signs that never came. He reached out, took her hands in his. I saw you washing linen last week. Cloth you wouldn't need if... She flushed, the heat rising in her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know how much it meant to you. Don't, he said gently, squeezing her hands. Don't apologize. His voice steadied. We've been married 7 weeks, Ione. Some folks wait years before it happens. The vow I made, that was built on hope. Not a promise carved in stone. I can't control when our children come. Ione Fletcher said softly, her voice barely louder than the fire snapping behind them. But I can make sure we're ready when they do. Her eyes scanned Breck Varnell's face, searching for any flicker of regret or disappointment. But all she found was the steady calm she'd come to depend on. The patience of a man who planted roots deeper than storm winds could shake. Are you upset that I haven't given you what you hoped for? She asked. What I want most, he said, squeezing her hands gently, is a marriage built on trust, on something real. Children will be a gift when they come, but they ain't the foundation. You are. He smiled then, that quiet, slow smile that had once made her pulse stumble. Besides, I reckon there's something special about this time. Just us. Learning how to be partners before we become parents. Learning how? She asked, eyebrows lifting, teasing despite the emotion in her throat. Unlearning what makes you laugh, he said. What makes you fold your arms when you're about to cry, and how to pull you back from that edge. Figuring out what you need from me. Not just as the man who wants to father your children, but the man who sleeps beside you every night." He paused, then added quietly, "And if it never happens? If you truly can't carry, we'll still have built something worth holding on to." He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed each palm. "Reverend, I didn't marry you for a child, Ione. I married you for your courage, your honesty, the way you trusted a stranger with your whole heart. None of that disappears if no child ever comes." The truth in his words struck her like a tide. Before she even realized it, the words slipped out. "I love you." Breck froze. "Say it again." "I love you," she repeated, this time with no hesitation. I don't know when it happened. Maybe somewhere between that first proposal and tonight. But I fell in love with my husband. Ione. He breathed her name like it was a sacred thing, pulling her against his chest with shaking arms. "I've been waiting to hear that since the first time I saw you out there, swinging an axe, not waiting on a man to save you." "You loved me then?" she asked, voice cracking. "Back when I was a broken widow?" "I loved your strength. I loved that you kept standing even when the world gave you every reason not to. I loved how you looked at me like I might be worth risking your peace for." His hands cradled her face, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't noticed. "And since then, every damn day, I've found new reasons to love you more." When he kissed her, it wasn't hesitant. It was a wildfire, long smoldering, and finally unchained. All the tenderness of their slow courtship gave way to something raw and consuming. That night, they didn't just make love. They became something new. In his arms, Ione discovered parts of herself she'd buried long ago. Desire, joy, and a soul-deep surrender she hadn't believed possible. Afterward, tangled in sheets and warmth, Breck ran his fingers along her bare shoulder in slow, absent-minded strokes. "I have something for you," he murmured, reaching toward the nightstand. "Another gift?" she asked, turning to look at him. His face held a boyish nervousness that melted her heart. "What's the occasion?" "The occasion is, my wife just told me she loves me." From the drawer, he pulled a ring. Not the simple silver band she'd worn since their vows, but something more. A warm gold band set with a small, clear diamond that caught the lamplight like a sliver of starlight. "Breck, it's beautiful," Ione whispered, her breath catching. "But you've already given me more than I ever thought I'd have." Breck Varnell took her hand gently and slid the ring onto her finger, just above her wedding band. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said. "She brought it with her from Norway when she was barely 18, and wild in love with a man who swore to give her a life worth remembering." The band settled into place as if it had always belonged there. "She wore it for 60 years, he continued, his voice quiet. "Through babies and burials, through storms and harvests. And when she passed on, she made my grandfather promise. This ring would go to the woman I chose to love." Ione held up her hand, admiring how the diamond caught the lamplight, how the gold glowed soft and warm. But it wasn't just the ring. It was everything. The way her chest ached with too much feeling, the way her breath trembled. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever owned," she whispered. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever owned." Breck stopped himself, then corrected softly, "Not owned. The most beautiful blessing I've ever been given to love." Wrapped in his arms, the old ring on her finger, Ione Fletcher drifted into sleep. 2 months ago, she'd been a woman surviving on grit alone, with no dreams left to chase. Now she was loved, valued, protected by a man who saw her worth even when she'd lost sight of it herself. Tomorrow would bring justice, the marshal, an end to the threats hanging over them. But tonight belonged to them. What they'd found in each other and what they were building, slowly, day by day. Marshal Deke Hollow rode in just after sunrise, flanked by 2 deputies and carrying enough legal weight to put Harlan Vex behind bars for life. He was a man in his 50s, weathered and lean, the kind of lawman whose boots had seen more dust than comfort. Mrs. Varnell. Mr. Varnell. He accepted the coffee Ione offered, settling in at their table like a man who'd been riding hard and long. I'm here to inform you that all claims against your land have been voided. Harlan Vex is in custody down in Rapid City, along with his men. Ione held her cup close, fingers tight around the ceramic. What'll happen to him? Federal prison, most likely, Marshal Hollow said. Cross-territory fraud carries weight, and we've uncovered at least a dozen other families he tried to swindle. He glanced through his notes, expression grim. He figured folks like you were too remote, too alone, to fight back. Didn't count on a whole community standing up. Breck leaned back slightly, tension easing from his shoulders for the first time in weeks. How deep was this scheme? Wider than we thought, Hollow admitted. They've been running it for near 3 years, targeting widows who remarried and inherited property, spread across Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming. Most didn't push back. We had help, Ione said, thinking of Sila and Otis Quinn, of Ruel Tanner stalling the courts, of every neighbor who stood beside them when things turned dark. And that help may have spared others the same fate. Hollow nodded. Now, I'll need statements from both of you for the record. After that, this case is closed. For the next hour, they recounted everything. From the moment Vex darkened their doorstep to the last time he rode in, thinking he could break them. Hollow listened close, sharp eyes tracking every word, interrupting only with questions that proved just how far his investigation had gone. One last thing, Marshal Deke Hollow said as he adjusted his coat, ready to ride. We found Vex kept detailed records on every one of his marks. He ranked your place high value, low risk. Low risk? Breck Varnell raised an eyebrow. Remote location, newlyweds, no strong community ties? Hollow explained. He figured you'd cave rather than fight, especially since the debt looked legit at first glance. A hard smile tugged at the marshal's lips. He never figured on the backbone the two of you had, or the grit this town showed standing behind you. When the marshal and his men rode off, Ione Fletcher stood quiet in the kitchen, eyes drifting across the familiar space that had almost slipped from their hands. Everything looked just the same as before. Sunlight on the scrubbed pine table, the mountains beyond the window. But now it all shimmered with meaning. Ephraim's handmade chairs, the grain of the wood, the scent of coffee. Every bit felt earned. Breck stepped in behind her, circling her waist with his arms. What's on your mind? She leaned back into him. Just thinking how close we came to losing all of this. And how different things might have been if we'd had to start again somewhere else. Different doesn't mean worse. His voice was low, calm. We would have built something new. Maybe not the same, but still ours. She turned in his embrace, searching his eyes. You think we could have been happy? Living in some drafty cabin out in the middle of nowhere? I know we could, he said without blinking. Home's not a place, Ione. It's who you build it with. Her hand came up to touch his cheek, caught off guard by how steady he was. How'd you get so wise? He gave a small shrug. Took 34 years to learn most things you think you need. You don't, but love, trust, someone to share the weight, that's what lasts. They spent the day in the rhythm of ordinary life, but everything shimmered with quiet celebration. Breck set to finishing the cradle he'd been carving for weeks. No need for secrecy now. The future they dared whisper about was beginning to take shape. Ione sorted the pantry, humming softly, and began to dream of their first real Christmas together. She thought about garlands strung across windows, hand-sewn stockings, maybe even the sound of tiny footsteps one day. That evening, they sat by the fire, the cradle between them. She traced its curved rails with reverence. The wild roses carved into its rockers matched the spoon he'd made her, and on the headboard, their initials were entwined, etched deep, permanent. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Any child would be lucky to rest in something made with so much care. Isard, Breck's voice was soft, far away. "I keep picturing it. Our baby asleep in there. Something we made together. Something perfect." A tightness rose in her chest, fragile and real. "Breck, what if—" He caught her hand gently, cutting off the worry. "No more what-ifs when it comes to children," he said. "They'll come when they're meant to. Until then, we practice being the kind of people worthy of being parents." She smiled through a sudden sting in her eyes. "What kind of people is that?" "Folks who love each other enough to weather any storm," he said. "Who put family first, who understand the greatest thing we can give our children is the strength of parents who never let go of each other." Later, as Ione stood at their dresser, brushing her hair, her gaze caught the mirror. She paused. The reflection staring back wasn't the woman who'd once chopped wood with raw, bleeding palms just to stay alive. That woman had been hardened by grief, half-starved by loneliness. The one in the mirror tonight was someone loved, and she hardly recognized herself. This woman in the mirror had color blooming in her cheeks and light shining behind her eyes, not just from comfort or survival, but from feeling loved, seen, chosen. "I look different," Ione Fletcher said softly as Breck Varnell stepped beside her, eyes meeting in the reflection. "You look happy," he murmured, his hands resting warm and solid on her shoulders. "You look like a woman who knows she's cherished." "That's what you see when you look at me?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. He nodded. "I see the strongest soul I've ever known. A woman who stood her ground when life tried to knock her down, twice. Who never gave up on the things that mattered. I see the mother of my children, the one I want beside me when my hair turns gray." That night, their love was unhurried, like it had nowhere to be except here, between two people who'd already crossed fire and storm just to hold each other. And as Ione lay wrapped in Breck's arms afterward, her thoughts drifted toward the life he kept painting in his quiet way. Children running through their home, turning stillness into laughter, scattering wild joy through the halls. Maybe someday, even grandchildren padding barefoot across these same worn floorboards. It was a dream worth holding on to, worth every ounce of patience and faith. And if it didn't happen just as they hoped, if it remained just the two of them forever, that'd be more than enough. Because what they had already, their bond, their unshakable devotion, was a kind of miracle. With her grandmother-in-law's ring resting on her finger and Breck's breath steady against her skin, Ione whispered a silent prayer for all the heartbreak that had led her here. For the day, Breck Varnell rode into her life with nothing but a bold promise about winter and babies. It had sounded like madness then. Now she knew. Some promises weren't about force. They were about tending love like firewood in snow. Quietly, daily, faithfully. And that's what made them come true. Spring came early that year to the Dakota Territory. March winds warming the earth, snow shrinking under sun, rivers humming clear and fast from the mountains. Ione stood at the bedroom window, her hand resting gently over the swell of her belly where new life stirred. The morning sickness had arrived in January, just as the cold settled deepest around their home. At first, she'd blamed spoiled stew or a chill, but the exhaustion didn't fade, and the nausea clung to her bones. Sila Quinn had ridden through a storm to check on her, smiling as she confirmed what Ione barely dared to believe. "Breck," she said now, her voice low so as not to startle him awake. "The sun's up." He stirred beside her, already reaching for her hand, like he had every morning since the news. His palm settled over her belly, right where their child rested. She felt him smile against her shoulder. "Morning, little one," he murmured. "Your mama and I can't wait to meet you." 4 months along, by Sila's count. That meant a late summer birth. The timing felt blessed, warm weather for recovery, and a strong baby ready for its first Dakota winter. "I dreamed of him again," Ione said, settling into Breck's arms, letting the moment stretch between them. "Him?" Breck teased softly. "Still convinced it's a boy?" "I'm convinced it's exactly what we need," she said, turning in his arms to look at him in the first golden light of morning. "Whether it's a son or a daughter." "Yes," Ione Fletcher said with a quiet certainty. "I think it's a boy. I think it's Eric." The name they'd chosen together felt solid, timeless, blending Breck Varnell's Norwegian roots through his grandfather Ulrich, and her own family's love of strong, honest names. If it turned out to be a girl, they'd agreed on Anna, to honor Ione's late mother, Mercy. "Eric Varnell," Breck said aloud, testing how it rolled off his tongue. "I like that. Has a ring to it." "Just Eric?" she asked. "Not Eric Alden?" She had once suggested they give the boy Alden's name as a middle name, to honor the man whose loss had, in the strangest way, opened a door to this love. "If that's what you want," Breck said gently. "But truth is, I think Alden would rather be honored by the life you found after him, not by a name carved into paper." His hand moved in slow circles across the round of her belly. "He loved you. Enough, I believe, to want you to find love again. Even if he couldn't have guessed it'd be me." Sila Quinn had taken it upon herself to ensure Ione didn't wear herself out during pregnancy. She arrived each week with casseroles, bundles of advice, and a kind of mothering concern Ione hadn't felt since Mercy died. "You need to eat," Breck said now, watching her nudge food around her plate more than eat it. "That baby needs you strong. The baby wants nothing to do with food this morning," she muttered, managing another bite of porridge and trying not to gag. The sickness still clung to her, even well into her second trimester. "Maybe later," she added. "Sila says it should pass soon." "Sila says a whole lot," Ione replied with a smile, even as she rubbed her stomach with affection. The truth was, she was thankful for the bond that had formed with the older woman these past months. Having another woman to lean on had made the whole journey feel a little less lonely. After breakfast, Breck headed out for spring planting. Ione kept to her list of acceptable chores, the ones Sila had approved. Nothing too heavy, nothing too tiring. She dusted the furniture they once feared would be taken in Harlan Vex's scheme. A year ago, she had been a widow scraping by through another lonely spring, unsure if her land or her spirit could survive another winter. Now, she was a wife, a soon-to-be mother, and every step of this new life was paved with the quiet assurance that she'd never have to carry hardship alone again. The baby had started to move a few weeks back, gentle flutters at first. She'd mistaken them for something she'd eaten, but now they were stronger, unmistakable rolls and nudges that reminded her, with every shift, of the miracle inside her. When she placed Breck's hand on her stomach and let him feel it, his face would soften with a wonder that nearly broke her heart. He wanted this child with everything in him. That afternoon, while tending the kitchen garden they'd expanded for the new year, Ione heard hoofbeats on the road. A small group was riding up the mountain trail. She recognized Otis Quinn at the front, with other families from town behind him. "Breck," she called toward the field. "We've got company." Turned out, it was a surprise baby gathering, organized by Salah and carried out by nearly the whole town. The women came with hand-stitched baby gowns, soft quilts, tiny carved toys made by their husbands over long winter nights. The men had built something bigger, a hand-carved rocking horse, painted soft brown and waiting in the nursery. "This is too much," Ione whispered, nearly overwhelmed by the outpouring. "Nonsense," Sila said briskly. "Every baby deserves to be welcomed. And every mama should know, her people will stand behind her family." The sun dipped lower as children ran barefoot through their yard. Adults sipped coffee and swapped stories. Ione looked around, her heart full. They weren't just building a family of 3. They were part of something larger now, woven into a tapestry of neighbors, friends, and kinfolk who would help carry them through all the chapters to come. "You look mighty at peace," Breck Varnell said, glancing over as the sun dipped low behind the ridgeline. The two of them sat side by side on the porch swing, their hands gently resting where their child stirred beneath Ione Fletcher's growing belly. "I am at peace," she murmured, leaning into his side. "More than that, I'm thankful." "For what?" he asked, brushing his thumb along her shoulder. "For you. For the way you showed up out of nowhere with the craziest offer a man's ever made a stranger. For me being just reckless enough to say yes." Her gaze lingered on his face, softened by the amber light of sunset. "For every hardship that proved we were stronger than we ever imagined. For this child who's made us into a real family." "We already were a real family," Breck said gently. "This little one just makes it louder." From the porch, they could see the land they'd poured themselves into. The sprouting rows in their garden, the pasture beyond, and the barn where horses trained under Breck's steady hand. Everything bore the mark of 2 people who'd clawed their way forward, together. But more than the land or the home, it was the laughter in the walls, the quiet moments like this one, that made it clear. They hadn't just survived. They'd built something worth holding on to. "You know," Ione said, staring up at the first stars blinking to life, "I never really thanked you." "For what?" he asked, bemused. "For keeping your promise. You told me back then that by winter I'd be carrying your son. Winter passed, and I thought maybe it wasn't meant to be." His hand slid over hers, resting where their child kicked softly in response to their touch. "I was just early," he said with a chuckle. "Spring came instead." "Doesn't matter," she whispered. "What matters is that we held on, long enough for love to take root." "And now," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple, "we finish what we started. We welcome this baby. Raise him strong, raise him kind, like his mama. And we love each other every step of the way." They sat wrapped in the hush of evening, crickets humming, wind threading through the pines. Ione let her thoughts drift. She thought of Alden Pike, his memory still a quiet ache, of the grief that once hollowed her out, of Breck's wild proposal, and the storm of change it had brought. Most of all, she thought of the life inside her, the child who'd never know loneliness, who'd grow up knowing love was a constant, not a question. A child born of faith between two broken souls who dared to start over. She remembered the words that started it all. "By winter you'll have my son growing inside you." It had sounded like a fairy tale. It had sounded impossible. But what she learned since was that real promises weren't always about time. They were about trust, about planting something fragile in the dirt and believing it might bloom. That night, wrapped in Breck's arms, her child nestled beneath her heart, Ione Fletcher let herself believe in miracles. Not the kind you find in books, but the kind you make with your bare hands and stubborn heart. Beyond their window, the mountain wind whispered of seasons to come. Summer sun and autumn harvest, a newborn's first cry, and the unshakable love that had taken root where no one thought it could. In the cradle by their bed, a quilt lay folded. Ione had sewn it stitch by stitch through long, snowy nights, threaded with dreams built on hope. And so the promise was kept. Not exactly as spoken, but true all the same. By spring, not winter, she carried his child, but far greater than that. They had made something lasting, a life, a future, a love story no one would forget. The giant cowboy had kept his word, and together they built a home where love would bloom, year after year, like the apple trees just beginning to flower in their mountain soil. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for giving your time to this story. Some journeys shape us, and we hope this one left a mark on your heart. There are more paths ahead, more legends of love, hardship, and redemption beneath the western sky. Please subscribe, leave your thoughts, and travel with us once again. Thank you, and God bless. Aviso legal. Disclaimer: the stories presented here are creative expressions and may mix historical inspiration with dramatized scenes. AI tools contribute to some elements of voice, imagery, and structure. But every published story is refined by editors and creators to ensure authentic emotional impact. We honor YouTube's policies and do not generate deceptive likenesses or artificial depictions of real people. All audiovisual components are legally licensed. Any use, redistribution, or alteration of this content must be granted through written consent. Your presence here means a lot. Thank you for supporting artistic storytelling.